Before the World Cup became this worldwide obsession, it was just an idea, and a very risky one, pushed forward by a stubborn Frenchman, a small South American nation, and a journey across the ocean that changed football forever. Welcome to Mundialia. This is Paulo Rigo, and starting today, we're going back in time to learn more about the history of the World Cup. But before we start this journey, I just ask you guys for two small favors. Please subscribe to the channel, it's gonna help us a lot. This is the first video of Mundialia, and also leave a like on the video because YouTube's gonna understand that this content is relevant. Well, and to kick off this adventure with a more chronological order, let's go back to 1930 and understand what happened in the very first World Cup. At the start of the 20th century, football was still taking its first steps. A little earlier, in the end of 19th century, more specifically in 1872, England and Scotland played what would be the very first match between national teams, and the game ended scoreless. At that time, football wasn't taken very seriously. Just to have an idea, in the 1900 Olympic Games in Paris, football didn't even award medals to the winners. But it was taken like a demonstration sport. Even so, thousands of people went to watch French, English, and Belgian sides in improvised matches. That unexpected interest with thousands of people going to watch improvised matches caught the attention of European officials who thought, well, if this fills the stadium without medals, imagine if we organize it properly. But to organize the sport properly, there was a small problem, or maybe a very big problem. The British, the owners of the ball at that time, the creators of the game. Without them, nothing would move forward. Since 1863, the Football Association would run and dictate all the rules worldwide. The game changed on May 21st, 1904, when 6 countries met in Paris: France, Belgium, Denmark, Netherlands, Switzerland, and Spain. And there, FIFA was born. Germany joined the 6 countries in 1905, and it didn't take long until England finally agreed to participate. With the British now, FIFA was a reality. From that point on, football started to spread very fast. England dominated everything at that time. They would simply beat everyone, teams like France, Denmark, Belgium, by humiliating scorelines and also touring the world with exhibition matches. With football growing with popularity and especially organization, FIFA was finally ready to take the next step, which was creating a world tournament for national teams. The problem is that the World War I broke out, so the plan of having an international football competition had to be postponed. With the end of the World War I in 1918, the plan of having the World Cup started to take shape, and it became a reality in the hands of a Frenchman called Jules Rimet. On March 1st, 1921, Jules Rimet, a 47-year-old French lawyer, became the president of FIFA. But he wasn't just a regular lawyer. He already had some influence in football. He founded a team called Red Star Paris in 1897. He was also the president of the French Federation in 1910 and had this vision of creating a tournament that would be independent from the Olympics. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but the Olympics was already a football tournament, well, an international football tournament. The problem was that it was amateur, and for example, after the Olympics in 1920 in the Antwerp, England decided to leave the tournament because of professionalism. With England leaving the Olympics, that opened space for new powers to emerge, and that's when the world discovered Uruguay's football. At the 1924 Paris Games, the Europeans faced a much more technical, faster, and more modern football played in the new continent. Uruguay humiliated everyone. They beat Yugoslavia by 7-0, then they beat the US national team by 3-0, 5-1 against France, 2-1 against Netherlands, and in the final against Switzerland in front of 60,000 people, they won by 2-1 and became Olympic champions for the first time. In 1928, 4 years later in Amsterdam, they repeated it. They beat Argentina in the final and won another Olympic gold. The sky blue shirt was now nicknamed the Celeste Olímpica. Those achievements by Uruguay, winning 2 golds in a row, proved one thing: football wasn't just European anymore. It was actually global, and that opened the way for Jules Rimet to make his dream come true: a World Cup. At the FIFA Congress in Amsterdam 1928, the debate got very heated. Why could we not rely on the Olympics anymore? What's the difference? Well, as I mentioned before, the Olympics was amateur, and the British and other nations they were already playing professional football, so they decided to withdraw from the competition. And FIFA got the message: if we want to make this serious, if we want real tournaments, we have to organize it properly. After years of discussion, it was finally decided. The World Cup is gonna be played every 4 years, just like the Olympics, after a vote of 23 in favor, 1 against, and 1 abstention. From there, an executive committee was created to finally make this dream become a real planning. This is when an unexpected country appears to be the first host: Uruguay. In 1925, long before Europe made any moves, the Uruguayan ambassador Enrique Buero, he made it very clear for Jules Rimet: Uruguay wants the World Cup. But in reality, nothing really moved forward, until 3 months before the vote in 1929, the Uruguayan officials finally came up with a concrete plan, and that included creating a huge stadium. The Uruguayan press called this idea, this project, pure madness. They thought that it was very risky, it was very costly, and that Uruguay wouldn't have money to make it happen. Even so, in May 1929, Enrique Buero made an official bid in Barcelona. 5 European countries also showed some interest in hosting this first World Cup. It was Italy, Hungary, Netherlands, Spain, and Sweden. But they started to drop out one by one. And the reason? It was very simple: money. Europe was still dealing with some financial problems at the time after the war, and hosting the first World Cup meant building new stadiums, paying for travels across the ocean, and of course, having some infrastructure that Europe didn't have at that time. Not even Mussolini's Italy backed that idea. So in practice, there was pretty much only Uruguay left in this conversation, and they had everything that FIFA wanted: financial stability, popularity, political will, a gigantic stadium under construction, and also the fact that they won the Olympic gold in 1924 and 1928. Uruguay was also celebrating the centenary of their independence, so they were promising a historical celebration. That is how on April 30th of 1930, Uruguay was chosen as the host of the first World Cup. Even before it began, the World Cup was already facing its first problems, and the main one was that the European countries didn't want to participate. The British had already left FIFA in 1928, and they would only come back in 1946. Other countries with strong football teams like Austria, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia claimed that they could not release their professional players, but the real reason was the financial situation of these countries after the 1929 financial crisis. And of course, the trip itself was already a problem. It was slow, expensive, it would take them weeks to get to Montevideo by ship. Yeah, not plane, ship. Just to have an idea for Europeans, Uruguay was farther than Pluto, for example, which had been discovered as the newest planet in the solar system. Pluto was about 5 billion kilometers from the sun, but for Europeans, Uruguay still seemed a bit farther. That is when Jules Rimet had to finally go into Mission Impossible mode. He began this personal diplomatic operation. First, he forced pretty much France to send a team even with many absences. Then, with the help of Rodolphe Seeldreyers, he secured Belgium. Rimet took a train to Bucharest to speak directly with King Carol II of Romania. He agreed immediately and even guaranteed pay for the players. Finally, Yugoslavia also agreed to play, even with an internal crisis between Croats and Serbians. So FIFA's president already had France, Belgium, Romania, and Yugoslavia confirmed. Thanks to his stubbornness, the World Cup would not turn into a Copa America. With the World Cup happening, now the teams entered in expedition mode. Brazil, for example, boarded a ship that came from Europe. Mexico traveled incredible 4,000 kilometers by train before taking a ship that took 18 days to reach Montevideo. It was far. On the ships, teams improvised training. French, Belgian, and Romanian players used wider areas of the ship to do some runs and some exercises. In Montevideo, the team's landings became a major event. Around 10,000 people packed the port to see the squads arrive. This was happening while Jules Rimet was handling the final details of the World Cup, and teams like Paraguay and Bolivia called up their players almost at the final moment. Upon arriving in Montevideo, he presented the trophy for the first time, the Victory, made of solid gold, 30 cm tall and 4 kilograms. It cost equivalent to 32,000 euros, which was a lot of money for that time. The trophy was created by a French sculptor, Abel Lafleur, an employee of the Museum of Fine Arts in Rhodes, and it took him 7 months to finish it. With 10 of the 13 teams already in Uruguay, FIFA held the draw on July 7th. We were going to have one group with 4 teams and 3 groups with 3 teams. On Group 1 we had Argentina, France, Mexico and Chile. On Group 2, Brazil, Yugoslavia and Bolivia. On Group 3, Uruguay, Romania and Peru. And on Group 4, United States, Belgium and Paraguay. The rule was very simple. The teams would play each other in their group and the winner of each group would advance to the semifinals. There would be only 18 games in that first World Cup in 1930. Different than nowadays when the games are played in multiple cities, in 1930 the games were only played in Montevideo, split across 3 stadiums, Parque Central, Pocitos and the brand new Estadio Centenario, the gigantic Estadio Centenario built specially for the tournament. With an expected capacity of 90,000 people, the Estadio Centenario was built in record time despite the heavy rain. The ball used in the tournament was called tiento. Made of leather and hand-stitched, it was dark brown with rectangular panels and an internal rubber bladder. The valve used to close the bladder affected the ball, which could create unpredictable plays and even injured players. Some even wore reinforced caps with newspaper sheets to protect their heads. The technology was still far from modern standards. On July 13, 1930, the most important competition in world football finally kicked off. 2 matches opened the history of the World Cups. It was France against Mexico and Belgium against the United States. The first game brought less than 5,000 people to Pocitos Stadium, and I'm here wondering why the first game wasn't played by the host, Uruguay, and why it wasn't played on the Estadio Centenario. But oh well, it was still a historical one, because it featured the very first World Cup goal in history. In the 19th minute of the game between France and Mexico, the French midfielder Lucien Laurent kicked the ball into the right corner of the goalkeeper Bonfilio and scored the first goal in World Cup history. Besides the goal from Lucien Laurent, Machinot scored twice and Languillet scored another one to give France the first win in the World Cup by 4-1 against Mexico. Meanwhile, at the same time at Parque Central, USA beat Belgium by 3-0, starting a very surprising campaign. With 2 goals from McGee on the first half and Patenaude on the second half, the United States won with their obsession of shooting at goal described by the Uruguayan press. The next day, July 14th, at Parque Central, Brazil played their first game in a World Cup. Even in a freezing Montevideo, 10,000 people showed up to watch Brazil face Yugoslavia. On a lucky play on the first half, Trinanic opened the score for Yugoslavia, and they made it 2 still on the first 45 minutes with Beck. On the second half, Brazil improved and created a few more chances on the Yugoslav box and scored a goal with Preguinho, who took advantage of a cross from Fausto. The game ended 2-1 and Brazil would lose their first World Cup game in history. Argentina started their campaign with a 1-0 win against France, and the referee of the game, the Brazilian Gilberto de Almeida Rego, finished the game 6 minutes earlier. The French noticed the mistake, and after some players had already showered, they convinced the referee that the game still needed to be played for 6 more minutes. And that's what happened, but no goals were scored and Argentina still won the game by 1-0. Outside the stadium, the game was marked by tension. About 500 Uruguayan fans threw rocks at the Argentina bus, and the situation was only controlled by the police about an hour later. Argentina threatened to go home, but after a long conversation with the organizers and the Uruguayan president, they decided to stay. Also in Group 1, Chile beat Mexico by 3-0, and the first own goal of the history of the World Cups was recorded. The ball deflected off Mexican defender Manuel Rosa's head and went inside the goal. After beating Mexico, Chile beat France as well by 1-0, and that game featured the first penalty miss in the history of the World Cups, when Vidal blasted it wide. The match was attended by 25,000 people, but in reality it was an invasion of the Argentinian fans who were waiting for their game against Mexico, which was going to be played on the same stadium. After losing to Chile, France said goodbye to the first World Cup with 1 win and 2 losses. A curiosity of that French squad is that the captain Alex Villaplane, he was executed by the French resistance in 1945 at the end of the World War II for collaborating with Nazi invaders. The Argentinians who stayed at Estadio Centenario after Chile beat France saw Argentina beat Mexico by 6-3 in one of the most eventful matches of that World Cup. In the decisive game of that group, Argentina beat Chile by 3-1 and advanced to the semifinals. Before their first match in that World Cup, the Bolivians decided to please the Uruguayans who were at the stadium. 4 players were meant to enter the field wearing shirts that would form the word Viva, and 7 more wearing shirts that would form the word Uruguay. The problem was that one of the players that was wearing a shirt with the letter U, he had stomach problems and decided to stay in the locker room. The result of this whole situation is in this iconic photo. Viva Uruguay. At the time, it was considered just a quirky incident, but nowadays, it could become a diplomatic mess. Then with a Bolivian player breaking his leg during the game, Yugoslavia took advantage of no substitutions at that time and beat Bolivia by 4-0, eliminating Brazil on the group stage and going through to the semifinals. Well, Brazil, as I said, was already eliminated, but they still had to play against Bolivia, who had lost to Yugoslavia by 4-0, and they repeated the score. Brazil won the game by 4-0, but that wasn't enough, and they said goodbye early to the first World Cup in history. In Group 3, Romania started their campaign with a 3-1 win against Peru in the game that had the lowest attendance in the history of World Cup. Only 2,500 people watched Romania's win over Peru. Okay, but you're probably wondering now, what about Uruguay, Paulo? You're not gonna talk about the hosts, one of the most important teams at that time, the Olympic champions? Well, that's true. Let's talk about Uruguay. Let's talk about the team which the World Cup was being played at. And Uruguay actually started their campaign not on a high. The first match was against Peru at Estadio Centenario in front of 58,000 people. But Uruguay didn't play so well, and they only won the game by 1-0 with a goal scored by Castro. The ball, by the way, barely crossed the line on that goal, and the Uruguayans called that half a goal. After that underwhelming debut, Uruguay made a better impression on the second game. And that was a decisive game because it was against Romania, who had beaten Peru on the first match. Whoever won that game would qualify to the semifinals, and Uruguay didn't take chances. They beat Romania by 4-0 with 4 goals on the first half and went through to the knockout stage. After beating Belgium by 3-0 on the first match, the United States were the sensation of that tournament. They confirmed their place in the semifinal after beating Paraguay for the same scoreline, 3-0. The forward Bertrand Patinaud scored all 3 goals and became the first player to score a hat-trick in a World Cup. To close Group 4, Paraguay beat Belgium by 1-0 in a game that didn't really matter. On to the semifinals, FIFA held the draw on July 23rd. Argentina, Uruguay, Yugoslavia, and United States. 4 teams, and of course we were going to have 2 semifinals. The expectation was a fantastic final between Uruguay and Argentina, but of course there was a risk that they would face each other in the semifinals. But the draw determined that Argentina would play against United States and Uruguay would face Yugoslavia, so the dream final was still on. One match would be played on Saturday and the other one on Sunday. In case of a draw, there would be extra time. If it remained level, there would be an extra time. And if no one scored, there would be a replay, so another game played to decide who was going into the final. There were no penalty shootouts at that period. In the first semifinal, 59,000 people went to the Estadio Centenario to see Argentina play against the United States. The United States, the sensation of the tournament until then, they had 2 players who got injured. The goalkeeper dislocated his shoulder, and as I mentioned earlier, no substitutions were allowed at that time. Argentina took advantage and won the game by 6-1 and secured their place in the final. The next day, Uruguay and Yugoslavia played the second semifinal in front of 80,000 people at Estadio Centenario, and Uruguay repeated the scoreline from Argentina, beating Yugoslavia by 6-1. Do you guys remember that Brazilian referee Gilberto de Almeida Rego that ended the match 6 minutes earlier between France and Argentina? Well, the Yugoslavs weren't happy with him again in the semifinal against Uruguay. Yugoslavia actually opened the score in the 4th minute, and 5 minutes later they scored another one that was disallowed by the referee. They also complained about Uruguay's 3rd and 4th goals, saying that they shouldn't have been allowed, but nothing was done, and Uruguay, again, beat Yugoslavia by 6-1, and were now in the final against Argentina. Montevideo and Buenos Aires are separated by only 50 kilometers of water. Between 1901 and 1930, Argentina and Uruguay faced each other about 94 times before the World Cup, with 38 wins for Argentina, 30 for Uruguay, and 26 draws. Very even. Trying to get to the Estadio Centenario to watch this historical final, the Argentinians started to cross the River Plate. 10 ships were meant to depart, but due to a heavy fog, only 2 made it. In the end, about only 3,000 Argentinians made it to the Estadio Centenario, and some of them only entered the stadium in the second half. But here we are, the final of the first World Cup in 1930 in Uruguay between Uruguay and Argentina. The Estadio Centenario opened its doors at 8 a.m. and by noon it was already packed. Nobody really knows how many people entered the stadium, but estimates say between 70,000 and 80,000 people, and some of them even forced their way in without paying. As I was saying, the rivalry between the two teams were so crazy that even for the ball, they fought before the game started. The problem here is that Argentina wanted to play with their ball and Uruguay wanted to play with their ball. The difference was that Argentina's ball was a little lighter, meanwhile the Uruguay's was a little heavier. The fight was so huge that the organizers decided on a draw, one half for each ball. The draw then decided that the first half would be played with the Argentina ball, meanwhile the second half would be played with the Uruguay ball. The atmosphere of the game was so tense that the referee appointed to that final, the Belgian Jean Langenus, he asked FIFA for a life insurance and to delay the departure of his ship in 2 hours so he could leave the stadium safely. This was Uruguay's lineup for the first World Cup final. Ballesteros, Nasazzi, Mascheroni, Andrade, Fernandes, Restido, Dorado, Scarone, Castro, Sea, and Iriarte. The coach was Alberto Supici, and Argentina started the game with Botasso, De La Torre, Paternoster, Juan Evaristo, Monti, Suarez, Peucelle, Varallo, Stabile, Ferreira, and Mario Evaristo. The coach was Juan José Tramutola. Even with Argentina's ball, Uruguay opened the scoring. In the 12th minute, Sea went down the right, dribbled his opponent, passed it to Dorado, who took a shot and scored the very first goal of a World Cup final. In the 20th minute came Argentina's response. Ferreira won the ball and passed it to Peucelle, who struck it into the top corner and tied the game 1-1. Argentina's comeback came in the 38th minute of the first half. Monti sent Stabile through, he won the race against the defender and finished past the goalkeeper. It was Argentina 2, Uruguay 1, and the Argentinian ball was making the difference on the first half. In the second half, the much disputed ball made the difference once again. This time, they were playing with the Uruguayan ball, and that's when Uruguay started to win the game. The equalizer came on the 13th minute when Sea scored and made it 2-2. 10 minutes later, on the 23rd minute, Uruguay already took the lead. Iriarte unleashed a long-range strike into the top corner and made it 3-2 to the hosts. And finally, in the 40th minute, Uruguay sealed it. Dorado crossed it from the right, Sea set it, and Castro finished. The ball hit the post and went inside the net. It was 4 Uruguay, 2 Argentina. Uruguay were the first world champions. The day after the final was celebrated as a public holiday in Uruguay. FIFA awarded the winners with gold medals made by the same sculptor who created the trophy. And this was the story of the very first World Cup. It didn't have Pelé, Maradona, Messi, Ronaldo, or any of these legends of the game. It didn't have VAR, for example, or not even television involved. It had cargo ships, semi-professional players missing work, it had fog, it had players breaking legs, unfinished stadiums, political fighting, a mess, but it was still a landmark. The tournament was very successful. In 1930, football stopped being this European game or just this Olympic amateur tournament. It became a global spectacle that stops the world every 4 years, thanks to a small country from South America, Uruguay, who took the center of the world, and to a stubborn lawyer Frenchman, Jules Rimet, who made the dream become true. And from that 4-2 at the Centenario onward, every time you hear World Cup, you're still hearing the echo from that final. If you enjoyed this trip going back in time to 1930 to know more about the history of the World Cup, please let me know in the comments what part you had no idea about. Please leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, share with your friends who love football and, of course, the World Cup, and I'll see you in the next chapter of the history of World Cups here on Mundialia.